I'm Cam Thomas. I'm representing Congressman Hern's office. I'm interviewing David Rule on Friday, June 14th at the Cityplex Towers in Tulsa, Oklahoma about his father, Arthur Rule. Also present is Adam Jones, who is representing Congressman Hern's office and operating the cameras. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project. David, where were you born?
I was born in Chanute, Kansas on October 31st, 1946.
Did you grow up there, or did you grow up here?
Yeah, no, I grew up in Chanute, went to grade school and junior high and high school and 4 months of junior college until I got drafted.
Who were your parents?
My dad was Arthur Rule, Arthur Irving Rule. My mother was Eva Jean Riley Rule.
What were their occupations?
Well, my mother was housewife, I guess you would say, a mother. My dad started out in Chanute. They had a bee farm, aviaries. They were into farming a little bit. They didn't have a big farm, just a small 5-acre farm, and that was their income. He didn't receive a pension from World War II, but he made enough until the weather and crops got bad, and the farm couldn't support 5 people. So,
how did you get into the bee farming business?
I'm not sure. My grandfather did that. He was he was born in Indian Territory, just where Keystone Lake is now. And then my dad was born in Terrellton, Oklahoma, just 25 miles west of Tulsa, on May 15th, 1923. And sometime during the Depression, the Dust Bowl, that farm couldn't support my grandfather and my dad, so they moved to Chanute, Kansas in the mid-30s. My dad was quite a nature. He had butterfly collections. He loved nature, and he also loved aviation. They only lived about a mile from the Chanute Airport. Olson Johnson Municipal Airport was a big airport back then in Chanute, and there were probably a lot of old Jenny's World War I airplanes flying in and out of there, and he got into aviation when he was young, interested.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I had my brother, Tim Rule. He was 11 months older than me. And then my sister, Pam, was about 6 years younger. And I have a half-sister and half-brother from my mother remarried after my dad was killed.
Do you have any specific childhood memories with your dad that come to mind?
Yeah, I called my brother and we kind of went through a few notes. And the biggest one, when I was only about, I must have been 4 or 5, my brother and I were playing with matches, and I would light the match and he would put it out with a can, and we got out of sync with it somehow, and we set the whole field on fire. And my dad had to come running home, and the fire department and the neighbors it was in July, so it was real dry and hot, and they put the fire out. And I remember my dad out there with a gunny sack trying to put the fire out, and he was mad. I'm sure I got a spanking, but I don't remember the spanking, but I do remember setting the field on fire. I do remember we had a Howard. It was called the Howard DGA. It was really a Cadillac of airplanes back then. It was probably a Navy surplus airplane, and it had 5 seats in it. It was fast. It was really a good airplane. I remember my dad taking us out to the airport, and me and my brother would get in it, and I'd get to sit next to him and fly it, but I couldn't even see out of it. But we'd fly the airplane, and we would fly around, and I remember we landed in a field, a farmer's field, and what he was doing is looking for places to put beehives. So he could see, get a really good look at the crops and say, oh, there's a good field down there. And the farmer would come out and say, what's the matter? And he said, oh, I just want to see if you wanted some beehives on your ranch here or your farm. And I remember doing that several times. And one trip, we flew from Chanute to Manford in the airplane, and to see my ailing great-grandmother, and we landed, the sheriff had to close the road. There was no airport out there, so we landed on a road and landed there and took off. And I remember that trip because it scared me pretty bad. But my dad was a safe pilot. He remember one time he took us to the airport, and we were getting in the airplane, and he started it up, and we taxied out. And you have to do a run-up on those airplanes to check the bags. And something was wrong. It wasn't there. The engine was fine, but the brakes were something wrong with the brakes. He couldn't hold the airplane, so we went back into the hangar. And I was so disappointed that I couldn't fly. I said, "Come on, this guy." He said, "Oh no, there's something wrong. We're getting it fixed." He wouldn't let us go. He was a safe pilot. He wasn't going to let anything happen to his two boys. So that was in Chanute. And then I do remember moving to, it was Malden Air Force Base. He was an instructor pilot for the, it's called Anderson Air Activities. They were contracted out to teach Air Force pilots to basic flying, and that was his paying job. He was also in the Navy Reserves. And I remember a few things there at Malden, going to school, first grade, and I don't remember too much about him because he was always gone. I don't remember him coming home and sitting down to dinner. I don't have any of those memories.
So it was your dad that served in the military? Yes,
he served in World War II. He was a cadet in World War II, and he served at several different places, and then he finished up in 1945 at Corpus Christi Naval Air Station. Is where they finally gave him his wings, and fortunately the war ended right after that, so he didn't have to go in the Pacific and fight the Japanese.
Which branch did he serve in?
He was a United States Navy aviator in the naval aviation.
Can you tell us about when your dad went into the military? Did he enlist or get drafted?
He enlisted in 1942, and then he was commissioned in 1948, lieutenant junior grade. So he didn't receive his commission until after the war. He wasn't drafted. He was enlisted. He volunteered because 1942 it was things weren't going too good for us.
Is there a reason he chose the Navy when he enlisted?
I don't know why he chose the Navy. I really don't. I know he was, Chanute, Kansas, you're nowhere near any Navy bases, but there must have been something that got him interested in joining the Navy and getting his wings with the Navy, but I don't know why.
How did you feel about his military service?
I was always proud of my dad's service, even though he was never in combat or never had to really do anything other than train. He was an instructor pilot, and I was always proud of him, and the whole family was, and we still today have pictures on the walls and his medals, and just real proud.
Do you remember how you coped with his absence while he was serving?
No, I really don't. My brother and I were pretty close. We played. We had toys. We had it wasn't really luxurious life. I remember our little house at Malden Air Force Base. We had one little light hanging down over the kitchen. It was a real small house there on the base. It was base housing probably. And we didn't have much, but we were happy.
What was it like living on a base?
Well, it was, I remember we weren't too far from the run-up area where they'd go out with a student and run up the airplanes, and me and my brother would go out there to the fence and just stand there and watch airplanes taking off all day long. So that was exciting, but it may have been on weekends or something, because we were probably in school, unless it was summertime. It probably may have been summertime. I don't remember, but it was exciting watching those old T-6s take off and land, and I guess that's why my brother and I both were interested in flying.
How did you and your family communicate with your dad while he was serving?
It must have been letters. It wasn't like today we have cell phones and Skype and all the latest technology to communicate with somebody halfway around the world. My mother and my dad must have communicated with letters and phone calls, but I don't remember talking to him, or I don't remember any of that they corresponded.
Do you remember how often he would send letters home?
I don't have. I think my sister has some of those letters, and I'm going to try to find them. There's boxes and boxes of. When my mother passed away, we found boxes of things, so we have to go through all that. We've been going through it for a year, and I'm sure there's some in there. I just haven't found them. I did find one letter from my dad, but it wasn't a good letter. It was he had a friend in Chanute that was a good friend of his, and they owned an airplane together. And the whole family took off in the airplane going somewhere, but they crashed and were all killed. And my dad, in the letter, said that he said that aviation was safe, and he was sorry that that it was shocking to him that they were killed, but he compared flying to automobiles. How many people they were killed in automobiles, even back in 1951, 52. There's a lot of accidents, and aviation was safe, and I read that letter. And
what memories do you recall your family members sharing about your dad's service?
Oh, well, that would have been my grandma and grandpa and my mother when we went over to visit them. We only lived in Chanute. We lived about 5 blocks from my grandparents. So we'd go and visit them, and I don't really remember. I know my grandmother was real bitter about, she was a Gold Star mother, and she was bitter about him being killed in the Navy, and just couldn't, she couldn't deal with it. My grandfather was a quiet, gentle man, and he accepted it, I think, but my grandmother never did. But we didn't really talk about, I know there was conversations, but my brother and I were probably out playing, climbing trees, doing something.
What unit was your dad attached to during his time of service?
In World War II, he was in the training command, in the Navy, Naval Training Command. I don't have any of that information. I don't have the exact, precise squadrons and that. I don't have any of that.
So which time period did he serve in?
World War II, from 1942 to the end of. I have his discharge papers from the Navy. And then he must have stayed in went right into the reserves because he was commissioned in 1948. And then the Korean War started in 1950. So technically he was in the Navy reserves from the start of the Korean War to 1953.
Where was he stationed?
Oh boy, I have all the information. I'll have to. I might have it on my list here. He was stationed at a lot of different places. I got it on his discharge paper. It was started out. It started out at Mount Vernon, Ohio. There must have been a Navy training base there, but I never remember anything about that. And then Cottonwood, Arizona was a little town in Arizona, and that was another Navy training base. And I remember finding a $1 bill, and all the pilots, all the students that he was with there signed that $1 bill. And my brother has it today. And I asked him, where's that dollar bill at? And he's looking for it. I said, don't lose that dollar bill. It has Cottonwood, Arizona. And then I found an article I just Googled Cottonwood, Arizona, and they really treated the servicemen there in the Navy, the cadets, they treated them really well. Of course, it was wartime, and they wanted to treat them good. And then St. Mary's, California, I don't know anything about that, but Norman, he was actually Norman Naval Air Station in Norman, Oklahoma. That's where he came home for leave and met my mom in Chanute. And I have a picture of them at the Capitol building. They must have been weekend leave or something, and they met there. And then she told me when she left Norman to see him on the train back home, she had to take the Santa Fe train to Tulsa, and then Tulsa up to Chanute. She was saying on the way back, she started crying. So the conductor came up to her and said, "Ma'am, can I help you? Is there anything wrong?" He felt sorry for her. She said, "No." She just left her boyfriend and didn't want to leave him. So she told us about that from Norman. And then Atlanta, Georgia. I don't know anything about Atlanta. I do know Corpus Christi Naval Air Station is where he finally got his wings.
What was his rank?
Well, in World War II, he was a cadet. Then in 1948, he received his commission as lieutenant junior grade.
What duties did your dad perform?
What duties? In the Navy, just learning to fly in World War II. He became an instructor pilot with the Navy at some point, maybe been Corpus Christi. After the war, it was called Anderson Air Activities. They were contracted by the Air Force to train pilots, and they wanted good instructor pilots. They wanted experienced, good instructor pilots, and since he was one in the Navy, he got the job right away. So, but his duties, that was his paying job. His duties in the Navy Reserve were to go to St. Louis Lambert Field and fly. I have orders. I still have the original orders that he had to fly a mission to stay current with the Navy. He had to fly so many hours each month, and that was his duties with the Navy Reserve. He wasn't. I'm not sure what the mission was. Probably just a training mission to keep instrument. He was instrument qualified, and at that time he had his He had his commercial single-engine, multi-engine rating from the FAA. He had his instrument rating and his commercial pilot's license. So he was. I think he had over about over 1,000 hours of flying after World War II. So that's what they were looking for as an instructor pilot, is someone experienced. So, and then but the Navy Reserve missions, I don't really know what I know he volunteered for a 7-week. His commanding officer wrote a letter to my mother and said he had volunteered for a 7-week training mission, something to do. He'd had to stay he'd been gone 7 weeks, at least 7 weeks, and I think that was during the Korean War. The Navy was running really short of pilots, and it had something to do with the Korean War, but I'm not sure exactly what.
Did he receive any promotions or awards during his time of service?
Oh, yes, and thanks to Congressman Hern's office, I tried to get my dad's medals started 2 years ago, and for a year and a half, I just never heard anything. Went to Ashley and gave her the information, and in about a month, she came up with my dad's medals, the Victory Medal and the American Campaign Medal, were the ones he got in World War II. So.
And he received his wings as well, right?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, these are my dad's wings here. Maybe I wear them. I put them on. I went to the Marine Corps League ball several years ago, and I had to wear I wore a tuxedo, and I put these wings on my tux, and a major came up to me and said, "Were you a Navy pilot?" And I said, "No, I wasn't. My dad was a Navy pilot." He said, "Well, why are you wearing them?" I said, "Because he was killed, and I'm not taking them off." So.
Did anyone your dad served with keep in touch with the family?
Not that I know of. That would have been maybe someone sending a letter to my mom or calling her afterwards, but I think once we had to move from Malden Air Force Base back to Chanute, Kansas. I mean, you have to go back to family. You can't stay there. There's no one earning any money, so you can't afford the base housing. So I just don't know if anyone ever really called my mom or not. She just had my little sister, which is 4 months before my dad was killed. So she was vulnerable. I mean, just having a baby and then having this happen. Had to move to Chanute, and then I remember the day she had to go. She left because emotionally she couldn't take it. So she was gone for a long time. I remember her leaving. I don't remember her coming back. So my brother and I were left with my grandparents who had just lost their only son, and that wasn't good. That was a tough time. So.
Do you have any other pictures or anything you want to share?
Oh yeah. This is my mom and dad, and this must have been when he was a cadet somewhere, probably at Norman. I'm thinking probably Norman. They had their picture taken, and I always liked that picture. But as far family pictures, I have. This is a picture taken when I'm not sure where. It must have been at Malden because it was the time period. I was probably about 5, and my brother was 6, and that's a picture of them in Oklahoma City at the Capitol building when he was on leave, and that picture of them. And I don't know where that was at, but I have a lot of pictures. And my mom kept everything for us. But that's all I brought today.
Do you remember how you or your family reacted to the news of your dad's passing?
Mm. Yes, I do. So my mother got the word, and it was a bad day. She took us in a room, me and my brother, and said, "Don't cry." So, anyway, she had to tell us. And she was crying. So I cried. I looked at my brother, and he was very obedient to my mother. He wouldn't cry, but I did.
Did you have a military funeral?
Oh yes, I remember in Chanute. The Navy was there. Full military service, and I remember it. Yeah. Folded the flag and gave it to my mom. So I was supposed to go up Memorial Day and decorate the graves and clean it, and the weather wouldn't permit it. It was flooding in Chanute and the area in Iowa, and tornadoes here, and so this first year I didn't go up and decorate. But I had my sister. My sister lives up there. She took care of that for us. I made sure she made, and then I'll go up later when I actually the military gives you the brass headstone, and it was nice. It was all they could afford, but I modified it about 10 years ago. I found I did on the back of the headstone, I carved the Navy wings out of, I used, I think it wasn't granite, it was probably flint, not flint, but it was a nice stone that I hand carved the Navy wings, and then I propped it up and put that behind it so it looked a little nicer. And need to go up and make sure it's still good. What happened was, and a lot of that happened at cemeteries, when they're mowing, they ran over the heads. They didn't hurt the brass plate, but they broke up the concrete around it, and it was kind of loose, so I went up and repaired it and put those Navy wings behind it so it sets up. Instead of flat, it sets up at an angle. So.
How did you cope with your loss initially?
Oh, well, being 5 months in the first grade and at Malden Air Force Base, and then I remember the long ride home to Chanute, and then it was tough. We found I think we used the insurance money to buy a house. My mom bought not a real big house. She was not extravagant. She was very thrifty and bought a house comfortable for us to stay in. And then I was moved to the first, brought into the first grade, I guess halfway through the first grade in Chanute. And the teachers knew what happened. They were very, very nice to me, but I just remember I couldn't do anything. I just sat there and looked out the window for probably the first grade, second grade. So I was way behind. I mean, the other students they did their reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I just sat there. So needless to say, my English and my writing are very poor. Dyslexic. I couldn't spell in junior high, high school, and I still can't today. And without my phone with it, The lady in my phone tells me how to spell words. So anyway, my mom tried her best. My brother was the opposite. He went studying, and I didn't. I went the other way. But it affected me in my junior high and high school. I couldn't spell. Science was good. Shop was, I could make things, I could do that. But yeah, she tried to get me in summer school, but in the 3rd grade. Oh boy, that didn't work. I didn't like that at all. She tried her best to get me caught back up, and I never did. So yeah, traumatic experiences like that, just when you're that young. Some people I just daydreamed. In school, man, just looking out the window all the time, just looking out, watching it rain, watching something, teachers trying to get me back in studying, and I just couldn't do it. So.
How did your family members cope?
Well, my little sister, she was only 4 months old, so, and my brother and I, we just, I don't know how he coped with it. I just know how I was. I know my mom said that after a few years she was lonely, and she started dating other men, which I didn't like that too much either. But you know, she had to go out and find somebody else. It'd been 5 years since her dad was killed. So now today I realize that she couldn't. She had her hands full of me and my brother and my sister. She needed help, and she remarried. But it's tough, real tough.
Who or what was your greatest source of support during that time?
Oh, my mom, definitely. Yeah, she was the best mom ever. She gave us all she could. You know, we did get my dad's pay, half his pay, but back then, I think it was $10,000, and they had to fight for that because for some reason they weren't going to give it to us. There was some people at Topeka, Kansas that went to bat for the family and got us the $10,000. I'm not sure why. My dad was at drill. He was assigned a mission to fly, and I don't know if the government didn't have the money or what, but we got the money, and then that's how we bought the house. But she was a wonderful mom. Yeah. So.
Did you or your family join any organizations such as Gold Star Families?
Well, back then there wasn't such a thing. There was Gold Star Mothers, but there was no Gold Star Families. You know, she got us into Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. My mom, we were at the Lutheran church there. I'm sure they gave us a lot of support at the Lutheran church. We were real nice, and I don't know what she did. I guess, well, my grandma, her mother lived there in Chanute, and then she had sisters and a brother. She had 4 sisters and a brother, and they were really supportive. We'd go visit them, so we had family, and that's it.
Did your mom have to go to work?
Not until we got in high school. She was able, with I think half my dad's pay and probably Social Security, we managed to get by. We had, summertime we had 1 pair of shoes and one pair of jeans, and if we wore them out, she said, "You wear them out. That's too bad. You're gonna wear them." That was it. So.
And you've since joined the Gold Star Families organizations here.
Yes,
Tulsa, right?
I was at the mayor's council meeting one time, and I met Commander Bossler, the Navy commander in Broken Arrow. And I asked him, I said, when is the Navy going to change their policy and bring in Gold Star Families? I said, my dad was killed. And I showed him all the paperwork, and he said, I'm going to check into it. I think we have changed, and you'll be hearing from somebody. And in Corpus Christi, I think it was in 19. I have all the paperwork here, but he got me in touch with a lady in Corpus Christi, casualty survivors outreach. They had just set it up. The Army had had it for a long time, survivors outreach, to find the families, but the Navy had just set it up. And I got in touch with her, and they pulled the casualty report and sent me an email saying you do qualify to be in the Navy's Gold Star family. And they sent the Gold Star, the Pell Pins to us, and all the, we were the first family in this area to get the Gold Star from the Navy. So I guess each service is different. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, they handle it differently. And if I hadn't met Commander Vossler, we might never have got it. But yeah, I tried. I actually the Navy was going to send an officer to Chinook and pin my mother. She said, no, I just want the family. So I pinned her.
How do you continue to honor your father and keep his memory alive?
Oh boy, well, I do everything I can. Memorial Day, I have the Honor and Remembrance. It's called Honors and Remembrance flag. I put that below the American flag, flagpole in my front yard. I get a letter every year from the Navy that they send a nice card to me every year now, Gold Star family. But I wanted to do more, so I took Eagle Ops about a year ago. Had the 5K run, and they made us nice big posters, pictures. They're this big. You can set them outside. They set them on the bridge. 170 of these pictures were on the bridge, on Boulder Bridge, and I applied for one and got it. It's a Memorial Day. I put that picture out there by the flag, by my flagpole, and I said, well, I couldn't go decorate the graves, so I said, I got to do more than that. And I took outdoor solar lights. I took over 200 of them and made a big heart around my flagpole with my dad's picture. And I said, that's Memorial Day. That's a tribute to him. And so after Memorial Day, I pulled them all up, and I said, that's not good enough. I made a big star, a flagpole, and his picture, and a big star, and it's out there today. I try to do everything I can with the Gold Star families. I try to get people to realize that we're here and we don't say much, but they need to do a little bit more for the Gold Star families, and a lot is being done today. So, and Congressman Hern is great. He's way up there on my list of good guys. But I do all I can to honor him.
What do you want others to know about your parent?
About my what?
About your dad.
Oh, well, he was a great guy. He took people for rides in that airplane. If they asked him for a ride, he took a lot of people in Chinook for a ride. He had there was no difference between anybody, their color, their race. He was just amazing. That's what I've heard from my grandparents and my mother, that he didn't matter who you were, he would do what he could for you. And that's about all you can ask somebody. So.
Did you serve in the military?
Yes, I was going to college in Chanute, junior college, and somebody said, you're about 2 days away from being drafted, and so I went down to recruiters. I said, don't I have a college deferment? And they said, no, you don't. I said, well, okay, I'm going to oversee the Air Force recruiter. So I enlisted in the Air Force. And then I went to Lackland, then I went to Shepherd Air Force Base and the jet engines, and then my first assignment was at Kadena Air Force Base on Okinawa. And unfortunately, that's when Rolling Thunder started, so most of the airplanes I worked on were shot down over Vietnam. 350 pilots were lost, and the F-105s alone. I was just a jet engine mechanic. I took them apart, put them back together, inspected them, and that's what I did for a year and a half on Okinawa. Then I was assigned to Beale Air Force Base in California, and I'd never heard of it. So they flew me to Travis Air Force Base, but then I was supposed to go on up to Beale, north of Sacramento, which wasn't very far. So I said, no, I'm going home. I've been a year and a half, I'm going home. So I went home and paid my own way home and back. Actually, I got a ride back on a C-130 from Kansas City. I showed them my orders, and they said, yeah, we'll take you. So at Beale, I had to go through a secret clearance to work on the SR-71 Blackbird, the top secret spy plane that made it coast to coast in 67 minutes. It was very high tech, very secret. Couldn't talk about it. Couldn't. It was really fascinating. I mean, the things that it did. I had to go on the flight line. We had to remove the engines and take them apart and take them to the shop, and then they inspected them. But they had. I got to sit in the cockpit and rig the throttles. I wasn't going anywhere, but I had to get another clearance to get in the cockpit because everything was just top secret. So I did that for a year and a half, and I was the only one that they could shove up in the inlet. With the opening was only this big. I was 6'1", a little over 6 foot tall, and only 130 pounds. So I was skinny enough to get inside there and crawl way back to inspect the engine. That saved a lot of time, and did that for a year and a half. And my brother was Tim was going to Purdue. He got his master's degree in aeronautical engineering at Purdue, so he was the math genius of Chanute. And I got out, was discharged, and then he went in. That's when he got. He came out of Purdue as a second lieutenant in ROTC. He was in Air Force ROTC, and then he went to flight training, and then immediately went to Vietnam flying forward air controller in OV-10s, which is not a good job to have in the Air Force. But he did that for a year over there, and so we both served, and I'm sure when my brother got home that my mother could finally take a big, deep breath. She was so happy we all made it through that, and I can see why. I mean, she didn't want another Western Union telegram. But yeah, my brother, and then he went as a flight instructor for about 4 years. He had to spend 6 years in the Air Force to pay him back for sending him to college. So he did that. He never flew after he got out of the Air Force. He had had enough.
Do you think your dad's service had any impact on you or your brother's decision to serve?
Oh yeah. We both went. You know, I thought about going in the Navy, but then I said, the Air Force might. I flipped a coin. Which line do I get into, either Navy or Air Force line, when took the oath in Kansas City? I said, I'll do the Air Force, and Tim's I knew he was in Air Force ROTC, and he'd probably be in the Air Force. So, and that was a good choice. I mean, I would have liked the Navy, but I did good.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
Oh, that's there's a lot of people that sacrifice to keep this country free. And, defend the Constitution is not cheap, and we need to keep it up. We need to keep the country free, and it's not going to be cheap, and it's going to take some sacrifices from younger people. I hate to see it every time I see a casualty. Today, I think of the family, but we have a lot of things going on in this world, and we need to keep our military strong and keep our faith strong and never give up. So,
is there anything you feel we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
no, Cam, I think we've done it. We've covered just about everything, and I really, really thank you for doing this. I know I work with a lot of World War II veterans, Paul Andrew and all of them, and I try to pay back people. I started out making plaques for World War II veterans. I made over 300 of them and gave them, if they were in the 8th Air Force, I carved the 8th Air Force patch on there and put a nice brass plate on it and gave it to them. And Air Force, Army, Marines, 300 of those, 300. I started making pins and giving those away and to people that served. And I found out that the World War II veterans were just a little bit, a lot of people recognize them, but they never got anything. So that really put a smile on their face when I give a veteran, World War II veteran. I made it for Vietnam veterans too, but I've done just about all I can do. I'm just kind of worn out now, but I keep going.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for conducting this interview, and that concludes our interview for today.
Okay, well, thanks.